to shy society. I wake up in the morning and the first thing that I see is a bunch of cranky people on a full bus with no seats, repeatedly undermining what's in common misery. Strangers remain blinded to existence and their history. What's the recipe? Well, taxes and a slave wage, harassment from the debt they face. Family happenings may take place, wait, negate the hate. The fam you'll never ever hurt. Brothers and sisters, not a damn thing from them you have learned. The pages turn, the future replicates the past. A building burns, fire revenge is pretty fast. War dead.
Okay, welcome back to the Existentialists. My name is Tony B. Existentialist is a YouTube channel ready to engage in political and social issues of our times. I am so frustrated right now because I just had 2 errors, and I apologize to everyone watching. You were trying to communicate with me through the live chats. I'm an idiot. This is why people call me an idiot. I'm so sorry. I literally went on with an entire rant, point by point. I had points. But let's try to get through this a little much more quickly. Please, if you're watching The Existentialist and you haven't done so yet, make sure to go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. It's very important that you subscribe to receive all our material. We do not live stream every single content we will be making in the future. You can also follow us on Twitter. We just created a Twitter account, capital D Existentialist. You can find all the YouTube link and the Twitter link on Facebook and on YouTube. You can find the links there in the description box. So, I am very frustrated. I'm very sorry. I'm here doing this segment called Wrong Thought on understanding the Trump insurrection. And last week, during the storming of the Capitol by Trump supporters, initially what I had first witnessed, and my initial response, right away, I jumped into it. I started seeing the clashes with the police. And I became curious to question how so many on social media, so many on the left, were quick to label these clashes with police domestic terrorism. Very, very curious because I was concerned. The danger of using such a dehumanizing term on any human being is dangerous. Why is it dangerous? When it comes to implications, what do you do with a domestic terrorist? How do you treat a domestic terrorist? What rights do domestic terrorists have comparatively to the international citizen of the world, American citizens? Most importantly, American citizens, right? So I had this big problem, and I went on social media. People called me a moron. They called me an idiot. I was told I was tone deaf. And they might be right. I might be all of those 3 things. And I had a time to reflect on. I understand emotions are high. And even myself, I was responding with emotions, and I was trying to come with reason. But my fear led my reason on trying to use this word domestic terrorism. I ran on this long rant already once, but I'll do it again for the sake of the audience. No need mentioning. I had a friend reach out to me. Why are you devoting so much energy to defending white supremacists? And for me, my initial response to him, and I responded this way actually. It's not about defending the white supremacists. It's about having a moral principle and defending it. It's one thing to believe something. It's another to put it into practice. And so I feared the implications that domestic terrorists are treated in a certain way. We've seen the Obama administration bomb an American citizen who was actually helping terrorist organizations. And in that man's son was killed with him. So the Americans they just bombed because they were terrorists. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But that's how terrorists are treated. These were Americans that were betraying the country to help organize terrorists, international terrorists around the world. White supremacists have been terrorists throughout these past 4 years. And actually, the number has been on a rise within the past 2 decades. So there's actual terrorists out there, and I meant well in what I was saying, but I was ignoring, I was not understanding where this energy was coming from, this darkness, this fear of actual terrorism, white supremacy. And that is where I can agree wholeheartedly. And I'll get into the domestic terrorism part and my concerns and how I may be evolving on the topic as information comes in. But for me, white supremacy indeed is at the heart of what we've seen last week. Now, I don't want to be strawmanned. I don't want to call all these people white supremacists. But we must admit, there are white supremacists, a large amount within these Trump followings. It's very real. I'm not lying about this, right? Everyone knows. But there's the white supremacy of hate and the white supremacy of culture. Now, the hate is identifiable. The man holding a Confederate flag. It's very easy, and it's likely that a lot of people who fly around Confederate flags have or hold on to racist ideologies. A supremacy. We are better. This is real. There are neo-Nazis within the Trump following, the KKK within the Trump following. White supremacy threatens people's lives. And this is the threat that people are responding to. What I ignored. The way I sounded tone deaf about a very, very real threat that has existed in this country. And then there's the white supremacy of a dominant culture, a dominant paradigm. The white hegemony, right? This idea that the white man, the WASP, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, these white Christians have inherited God's kingdom in America. They've been blessed by God, a nation that is to be theirs. And the culture wars are real. There's much resistance to progressive revolution in the term of culture. And the white supremacists, not as a hateful ideology, but as a dominant paradigm, they feel entitled. It creates a sense of entitlement. So the Stop the Steal rally, which led into the storming of the Capitol, because that's what it was. That's where all these people were gathered for. They wanted to stop the Electoral College vote count, because the Electoral College already voted. What was happening in the Capitol, in my opinion, and someone could check on my facts, it was ceremonial to count those. So they went in to delay and disrupt the process, in my view. That's where my mind went. They're very angry. They're convinced the fraud of a leader, Donald Trump, convinced them, hey, they stole the election. We have evidence, even though all the courts laughed us out of the courtroom. Except for like one or something. No. They believed their fraud. They demanded justice. They demanded that their republic not be corrupted by communists, socialists, the Democrats. They were convinced of this. It's very real that they were convinced. Many were manipulators. And so that's something to consider. Despite their demand for justice, they were ignoring the fact, or maybe they acknowledged they were disenfranchising voters of color by trying to say that these were illegal votes. You decided that the people of color in some of those democratic strongholds aren't American enough to have a vote. Now, they're not saying that, but that's the implication. There's a lack of care there. So yes, white supremacy indeed, not only as a hateful ideology, that is a large possibility, but as a dominant idea that white Americans are entitled to this nation and all its glory for themselves, apparently. So I am on that front. I understand the nuances of white supremacist ideology being rampant in this Trump movement. And at the heart of my concern, well, I don't have to say white supremacy is fully a hateful ideology, but it is destructive because of its dominance. I come from a philosophy of humility, compassion, empathy, care, love. And while many misuse the language and the philosophy and the legacy of Dr. King, this quote spoke to me. And I shared this from a fellow friend on Facebook. And when I read it, I really reflected on how I was feeling. Because darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so when I saw the word domestic terrorism being applied to an entirety of Trump supporters, I reacted with emotion out of love for humanity, of humility and compassion, forgiveness. I saw clashing with the police as a forgivable act. Yes, they need to be held accountable. I saw them trespassing in the Capitol. They need to be held accountable. I heard reports, and I actually saw a fire extinguisher being sprayed at people in the Capitol. Not the Trump supporters were spraying the fire extinguisher. So I saw assault. And I thought, yes, these people need to be held accountable, but domestic terrorism is it's almost unforgivable. If I can say, it's just unforgivable. And that's what we were saying about the entirety of everyone. This is serious stuff in the political world. People's lives are really at stake. When I mean people's lives, people that fear an actual terrorist threat. They fear white supremacy. They fear the policing institutions and the other government institutions that then neglect the welfare of the American people in its entirety. So when I see domestic terrorism being used to define people as an entirety, I admit there were acts of terrorism, domestic terrorism. The two people, or not, we don't know two people, but there were some pipe bombs. A pipe bomb found at the RNC headquarters, pipe bomb found at the DNC headquarters. There was Molotov cocktails found outside in a van, outside the Capitol. These are acts of terrorism. And I knew this, but I feared that the hate and the fear of white supremacy justified the label domestic terrorism. I understood it, even though I didn't present it that way on social media and was called a moron and an idiot, but it was still real for people. And so that's why I'm here to really empathize with what they're saying when they call me tone deaf, when they call me a moron, when they call me an idiot. There's something there that they're saying. And all I say is, but, feeling as if I didn't hear them in their worries about an actual threat, an actual insurrection, a coup d'etat. Without a doubt, this was an insurrection. They acted violently. They rebelled against the government in a violent way. They attacked the castle. That's treasonous in the eyes of a king. But that's what I feared. That when it's treason in the eyes of a king, it's unforgivable. And who among us, and I say this to the best among us, who will volunteer first to pull the trigger if treason is to be met with death? No one's calling for people to be murdered because they're terrorists. But that's the implication that is quite possible. I've seen someone on Facebook say they would take them to military courts if it was up to them. And then they told me not to tell them what to think and do. And I never did it, but they told me what to think and do. I get into these feuds like it's sport, and I fail to recognize where people are coming from because I'm all about semantics, definitions. I love to argue. But these are serious times, and I failed on that front to reach out to someone that was truly worried about how white supremacy in action is allowable. It goes unpunished. It's part of the dominant sphere, the public sphere. And we're just supposed to be like, don't call them domestic terrorists. Come on. So I sound like an idiot because it's not fair. During BLM protests that people are attacked. There was a protest right outside of the White House. Not right outside the White House, but they were cut off from that area. And Trump wanted to go for a walk in front of a church. And all those people were gassed. They were gassed to clear the streets from the protesters because President Trump wanted to take a photo in front of a church holding the Bible like a dumbass. But yes, let's get on to where I'm wrong, where I could be wrong as the evidence piles up. And if you are listening, I'm so grateful for you to listen. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Like, comment. I love to engage with individuals. It's very important that we have these conversations during hard times. Okay. So in the spirit and legacy of MLK, once again, it's to believe one thing is the easy direction, but to practice is very difficult. So that's where I come from. I am no MLK, but to love and forgive is the center of my philosophy. Even if I am ignorant and pushy, aggressive in the way I discuss politics with individuals, I try to be reasonable, and I'll apologize for my ways. But I'm open to having this conversation with those willing to have it. So let's see where we're at right now. As the evidence, my apologies for that. It seems the evidence is coming in. This is why I'm changing my tune a little. And we're about to find out. We're about to find out exactly if there are more people to be held accountable for this storming of the Capitol. Are there more acts of domestic terrorism in the midst? Am I wrong about the number of people that should be applied under that label? This is Crash Override on Twitter. Bad news. Left extremists have captured and archived over 70 terabytes of data from Parler's servers. This includes posts, personal information, locations, videos, images, etc., etc. Parler is an app. It was initially started to be a free speech advocate space. So it was a competitive market to challenge Facebook, Twitter. The thing was, a lot of right-wing organizers, extremists, they decided to use this platform. Parler has been denounced by all the major web host carriers, Amazon, Google Play. They had nowhere to run. They found some place to go, but their funders pulled their money. They wanted nothing to do with Parler. And what has happened, before Parler erased much of the posts from all of its users, left-wing activists, they collected all this data. And now they're compiling it and gonna soon allow it to enter the public sphere for review. And we might see some damning evidence that implicates individuals into the storming of the Capitol. Maybe making them look like they were trying to conspire to overthrow the government, create acts of violence, plots of terrorism. This is gonna come out, and it's gonna make the right-wing organizers and extremists look terrible. And you know what? Hey, there's accountability that we believe in. So if that falls on you, you know, no one likes to be doxxed, and it's a complicated conversation to have about releasing people's information. But this is public. You put it into the public sphere. You enjoy being this person. Now you're going to know what consequences are for taking certain positions. Sorry, but that's the way it is. So I have this MSNBC video just to touch on a few points. Once again, we're talking about the storming of the Capitol, and MSNBC did a video. I believe it's Chris Hayes. Not a big fan of MSNBC or Chris Hayes, but I want to go video by video to talk about what's happening. So this is the first video. They're talking about so far that 5 individuals has been pronounced dead. There was actually a 6th person that was pronounced dead. I guess if I'm being accurate, they took their own life. They committed suicide. After all the trauma that happened afterwards, they took their own life. But let's look at this video really quick.
4 of the people who were killed as a result of the Capitol attack appear to have been rioters themselves. One of whom was shot in the neck by police as she and others attempted to break into the speaker's lobby just outside the House chamber, as you can see in this video.
So, you know, 4 Trump supporters gone. And in that situation that you saw where they're trying to bust that door open, in that moment you will see later, the woman that they showed the picture of, she was an unarmed Trump supporter. I say this very, very importantly. She was an unarmed Trump supporter. We've already labeled these Trump insurrectionists, we labeled them as domestic terrorists. That's what happens when a domestic terrorist is coming at you and threatening human life. Have a disregard for the safety of the people, of the public, of the government. They get shot dead. She was unarmed. Now, this is why I worried about the use of domestic terrorism, because there have been people that defend those with knives, and I've been one of those. I've seen someone with a machete, I think it was in London, and they disarmed this person skillfully, tactfully. They used the right strategy to disarm the individual without killing them. Now, there's nuance there. There's mental health concerns. Some people that come at you with knives, come at police officers with knives or sharp objects or weapons, they have mental health issues, and so there's an outcry of not having an effective response to those situations. In this situation, this woman was unarmed, so I'm not gonna just throw mental health issues out there. I don't think that's what this was. I don't know her history. They said she was actually a veteran. She was a veteran. That's what I could be misinformed, but I thought I read she was a veteran. And now she's dead because she stormed the Capitol. She posed a threat by what she was doing by climbing. But there has been arguments for the past 4 years that individuals who are not armed should not be executed. But it doesn't apply in this situation. So it rubs me the wrong way. I know the differences between people trying to storm a Capitol, threaten democracy, and those out in their public lives trying to just avoid the police, battle the police. But one's not called domestic terrorism. But this instance is, because it was a threat to our democracy. It was a threat to the castle. I have Gerardo Nava. Thank you, Gerardo Nava, for your comments. It's ignorance and blind obedience for a false leader. A lot of unrest that took place in D.C. shouldn't have happened. This is true. Should not have happened. But for 4 years and even before that, the Trump rise It was all inevitable. It was all going to happen. Well, they were calling for law and order, and they were ridiculing BLM protests for riots occurring, for stores being broken into. Here they are. They feel justified. BLM protests and rioters, people in those movements and actions, they felt justified because they were trying to liberate their lives from a corrupt police institution. The Trump supporters were trying to liberate themselves from a democratic steal. A democratic steal that has been formulated on a conspiracy of lies. At least that's what all the evidence shows. Gerardo Nava, the woman that was shot, was trying to pass through the window of a barricade area of the Senate building. Yes, that's what she was doing. And we're going to see that later. We're going to see, that's the last video clip that I have. She was unarmed. So being unarmed is no longer a general explanation of why unarmed people can't be shot or executed on the spot. So I'm pointing out the irony of it. I'm not comparing the killing of black and brown people being unarmed, an extrajudicial killing, and the extrajudicial killing of this woman as so easily comparable. It's not so easily comparable, but you see in the nuance, this person was unarmed. Yes, Air Force veteran for 11 years of service. See, that I knew I was correct. So thank you, Gerardo Nava. So I'm just pointing out that irony, and it's upsetting to people to hear it. Comparing a movement that tries to hold police accountable and a movement filled with neo-fascist, white supremacists, authoritarians, a movement that disregards a democratic right of people of color, that disregards immigrant lives, right? There's difference, of course, but the unarmed part is rubbing me the wrong way. But that's what happened, right? So let's go on forward. Let's explore what the MSNBC video is getting at, and we'll discuss the domestic terrorism. So let's look at. We all know the cop was killed, so let's see some little information on that.
The most recent casualty of the mob that the president and other Republicans incited is Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. He's a 42-year-old veteran. According to reporting, Officer Sicknick was struck with a fire extinguisher amidst the chaos on Wednesday. He succumbed to his injuries last night.
Now, I seen someone, and this is me again going into semantics, my problem, right? I see someone say this was terrorism because a cop was beaten to death, or he was beat to death by a Trump supporter, a Trump terrorist. And I responded with a lot, but I said beat to death. There was a clash between the police and the rioters. The police officer reportedly got struck by a fire extinguisher. And later, because of the trauma, blunt force trauma of it, they reported to have passed later on. That's not beaten to death. That's struck and later dying. It's still, for me, you can put a murder charge if you find out who did that. That's how close it gets to domestic terrorism. But as I stated earlier, because human life is more important than property. That's a notion that we can all get behind. But property, so long as it's a means to sustaining someone's life, that means a lot. If you destroy something of someone's, it's property, but that means life or death for them, that's serious. It's not terrorism, but that's serious. It was sad to know that this happened, and people need to be held accountable. Clashes with the police that happen could result in someone getting severely hurt and dying. A police officer could die. During the summer, police officers could have died at Grant Park, Chicago, when left-wing protesters, were throwing objects, ice bottles, fireworks. Someone could have died. Someone could have been severely injured. They're not terrorists. It's horrible to even think about comparing any of this. I know. But that cop shouldn't be dead. Someone needs to be held accountable. And this is where I get into some gut-wrenching stuff. Something that now makes me stop being Tony B for a second and realize that the reason why people are applying this label so easily, the domestic terrorist label on all these Trump protesters and rioters, because they were so contempt with the idea of what was going on, what was being chanted. Jews will not replace us, for instance. Well, it's not domestic terrorism. That is a sign of white supremacy. Trump supporters were contempt with white supremacy during that march in Charlottesville. And now here's a shot of Trump supporters going so far to call for death, which now we can really see how this is domestic terrorism. See, I'm conceding. This is terrifying. So let's take a look at this video and see what I'm talking about.
And after the rioters broke in, we got eyewitness accounts of people marauding through Capitol Hill looking for the vice president. A Reuters editor saying he heard at least 3 different rioters at the Capitol say they hope to find Vice President Mike Pence and execute him by hanging him from a Capitol Hill tree as a traitor. Indeed, one of the insurrectionists erected a gallows with a noose right outside the Capitol. This is a video of a crowd chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." While Pence, the vice president, was in the Capitol, had to be taken to a secure location because he had failed to do the thing that Donald Trump told that crowd of people, that mob, that Mike Pence had to do or face consequences, or face their wrath.
So, that's something that should be taken serious. That's me no longer just stopping and say, hey guys, let's not call them domestic terrorists. That's me stopping in horror and really reflecting on, man, these people, while it was reported, someone tweeted, I overheard people say they wanted to hang Trump, they wanted to hang Pence for betraying us. And then you have the video and audio evidence that they wanted to hang Pence. Now, we can say they were saying so metaphorically. It's actually well known and documented that, at least from what I've seen from the late 80s and throughout the 90s, right-wing rhetoric is often fueled with very aggressive language, symbolism, very lethal language. At one point, crosshairs would be used in political advertisings for the right-wingers. Crosshairs, you know, like a target. A crosshair's put on a politician's head. What does that even mean? What is the implication of that? What are you trying to message to your supporters? That we have to take out the threat, right? So stuff like that is prominent within right-wing history, the political movements of the United States. So that's not new. They try to rely on metaphors and they try to be slick. They try to code themselves. This is why people still call others racist, because it's covert racism, not overt. Overt would be very widely open. Like, oh yeah, I'm racist, and they use a racial slur. Like, that's the obvious, right? Then there's covert racism, which the right-wing movements have been good at hiding. And now hanging Pence. There was a noose posted on one of the Capitol trees. This is an act of terror. Could they be symbolic and be metaphorical? Yeah, they could be. And they have free speech, but they are calling for violence. That's where free speech hits a roadblock. You don't have a right to threaten people's lives and incite violence. That's the limitation to free speech. I'm a free speech absolutist to the point when people are being threatened and violence is being asked to be used against leaders or anyone. Hang Pence. How terrifying in these scenarios. So, this is where I have become careless, and I had to wait for the evidence. And that's why I reflected how serious this could have been, life or death. And so, okay, they're just chanting. Maybe that's what it is. Well, MSNBC goes on, Chris Hayes goes on. He talks about this man with zip ties.
And then there are the deeply unsettling images of this guy in the Senate chamber, dressed in full tactical gear, carrying plastic zip ties. As Dan Coys writes for Slate, those are actually flex cuffs, the plastic double restraints often used by police in mass arrest situations. They went into the Capitol, as Congress was counting electoral votes, equipped to take hostages, to physically seize officials, and presumably to take lives.
Look at this. See, this is the nerve-wracking part about all of it. What's the defense? The guy, okay, COVID-19 covering your face. I think that's strategy right there. That's a tactic you're using, concealing yourselves while holding something that implies you intended to hold people captive, kidnap possibly. We don't know. Anything could have been possible in that scenario. That individual had zip ties. Now, could we find out more that maybe they were trying to fix something with the zip ties just in case? Maybe if people got injured, the zip ties could have been used to help people. Maybe that person had the zip ties and they wanted to help restrain violent people. What narrative can you spin off of that? The implication is clear. That was a fearful sight. And that's why people use the word domestic terrorism. That's why people like me need to reflect and realize, damn, what was that guy doing with those zip ties? Imagine if they would have reached the Senate or the Congress. I'm not trying to instill fear on people. That's the last thing I want to do. I want people to rely less on fear and anger and rely more on love and forgiveness, understanding, empathy, compassion, right? But that is terrifying. And they all followed a cult leader, a fraudulent person, Donald Trump. And this is the part where the 11-year veteran, the Trump supporter, who was killed by Capitol Police for trying to get closer into the chambers. Right? This is a warning. Her body is blurred out, but you still see exactly what happens. And then I want to discuss what exactly we see. I want you to keep your eyes on two to three police officers that stand between the doors and the protesters / rioters. Let's look at this video.
We want you to go home. I'm recording, and there's so many people. It's just, they're going to push their way up here. Bro, I see people out there get hurt. I don't want to see you get hurt. We will make a path dead ass. Like, we don't want. That's what I'm saying. We'll make a path, bro. Please, just let us make a path. Just let us make a path. For the whole country hates I want you to go home. Go. Let's go. Get this shit.
Yeah, so I'm responding to Darren Amstutz. Darren seems to be a Trump supporter. See, Darren believes Trump won by a lot, quote. Actors are good at remembering lines. I don't know if that's towards me, Darren. But yeah, actors are really good at remembering lines. I mean, that's why they get paid millions of dollars, I presume, right? So, have all sided, conservative courts have sided against Trump. Skepticism is one thing. I understand why Trump supporters are skeptical about the election results based on what they've seen in videos and then claims by others that worked on the ballots. They were poll watchers. I get the frustration, and you know what? I say call for a massive investigation. Do it. Create a committee and do it. I'm okay with that. If the evidence is there, I'll admit I'm wrong. And us as a people going forward, we need to admit that an election was stolen. But where's the evidence, Darren? And so if you saw the video I just played, it was disheartening to see that unarmed Trump supporter killed. She shouldn't have been doing what she was doing, right? But did you see those officers? Well, they thought about their own safety, which is important, right? I think that's something that we need to appreciate about people, is they have a right to preserve their own life. I get that. It must have been scary. But did you hear the individual tell them, dead ass, we're going to make a path? Pretty much tell them, if you guys don't move, we're going to go through you. That's what he said. If you hear him in his tone. And then what did the cops do? The cops moved to the side. Now, here's something that I want to be real about. And this is why I've had these problems. We've already seen the zip ties being a serious thing. That implicates, holy crap, this could have been an act of terrorism. They called to hang Pence. Could have been a metaphor, but that smells act of terror. If these were domestic terrorists, if they are, the cops assisted, they allowed, they were complicit. Now the cops are implicated. And this is an important message to send home. Some of the officers, the Capitol Police in that building, do need to be held accountable. It's a very, very serious implication. Cops took selfies with these rioters. Now in that scenario, the cops moved out of the way. And as soon as they moved out of the way, what did the protesters, rioters, domestic terrorists, what did they do? They started bashing. And even before they moved, the rioters, they struck at the window, at the glass. They struck at it right in between the officers. And the officers, all they could do was blink. But if these were domestic terrorists, let's say they are, what does that make the officers that allowed it? Can't they be charged as domestic terrorists as well? I thought domestic terrorists was supposed to be taken as a serious threat, and no matter what, we would not aid the domestic terrorists as public servants. So it's nuts. Leadership, obviously, of Capitol Police, I heard they resigned. Too many officers are watched. They're gonna get away with their involvement, their allowance of it. And it's messed up. This is why I'm against the police state. There's a lack of accountability. Now, those cops could have been fearing for their lives, so I might give it to them. But the fact we call these people domestic terrorists, and those cops just went to the wall. They went to the wall, and they watched. Everyone's just polite to them. Hey, thanks. And the guy told them, we defended you when no one defended you. You owe us this. Entitlement. Yeah, see, Gerardo Nava, thank you. Zip ties, let's be real. Zip ties are going to be used to drag out politicians to be beaten, humiliate and intimidate the politicians for the crowd's own entertainment. Yeah, an insurrection, right? A rebellion a coup d'etat. Governments around the world, people around the world have done this before. This isn't new, right? They drag their leaders out and they kill them in the public square. So very, very terrifying. Lots there. So my heart trembles because of what we saw, what happened, what I'm seeing, what I'm showing you, and it doesn't look good. And here I am. I'll be called defending white supremacists. Well, what are the implications of calling people domestic terrorists? For instance, if you call someone a rapist, this is a thought exercise here, okay? You call someone a rapist, you want them to be held accountable as a rapist, right? Someone who committed rape should be punished as if they committed rape. Someone who murders and is called a murderer needs to be held accountable based on the action. So when you call people domestic terrorists, it would only make sense that people want these individuals to be held accountable, to be punished as if they were domestic terrorists, as if the act they committed was an act of terror. Therefore, the crime needs to fit the punishment. The punishment needs to fit the crime. Could be other way around. And if that's what people want, people are getting charged. There's people getting arrested already. Federal charges are being applied. Hey, accountability. That's what it is. You have to do it. It was violent. It scared people. It's terrifying. What are you doing? That's not how this democratic order works. But for those of us that want to quickly apply the label domestic terrorist, which it seems there were acts of terror committed, so now there's validity to what people are claiming and making me closer to being wrong than right about my moral stance. But here is something that I follow. Is the ACLU. The ACLU is established. It's considered a left-wing propaganda machine. A leftist, pretty much. They fight for constitutional rights. That's their point, the ACLU. The ACLU is set up by lawyers to fight for constitutional rights. They'll protect right-wing rights. They'll protect rights across the board. They don't care if it favors one or the other. And so when I hear people use the word domestic terrorism, I think you want to punish these people as if they were domestic terrorists. And so I think, in my mind, you sound like the state. You sound like you are a fan of the Patriot Act, which for me, we need to abolish the Patriot Act. Does there need to be some form of security to fight against terrorism? Yes. The Patriot Act was a violation of our rights, however. And while the NSA has been slammed down in the Supreme Court, Democrats and Republicans are still openly not even trying to reform the Patriot Act. They pass it. So there's some challenge it. Republicans, Democrats alike challenge the Patriot Act. But some still hold it as a holy grail standard of security against terrorism. And so I pulled this up from the ACLU and how they can best reflect my view. Let's see, where are you? Let me make sure I got this, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies. Nope. Very interesting. Wow, okay. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I know what I'll do. Give me a sec. I apologize, but I want to pull this ACLU up. Something went wrong. If you're seeing this, this is how the U.S. The Patriot Act is redefined. The Patriot Act redefines domestic terrorism. So, let me just zoom in a little for everyone. So this is the ACLU. So this is it's kind of dated, but it's still relevant to today. How the ACLU, how the U.S. Patriot Act redefines domestic terrorism. And in this first paragraph, it states, Section 808 of U.S. Patriot Act expanded the definition of terrorism to cover domestic, which is very serious. So this isn't something to just be dismissive of, but the ACLU is making a point that I'm trying to adhere to. As opposed to international terrorism. A person engages in domestic terrorism if you do an act dangerous to human life that is a violation of criminal laws of a state or the United States. If the act appears to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Kidnapping, okay? I'll pull that back up right now. I had this whole thing that I wanted to show people. But no, mess with me, huh? This is whack. So, one of the important things that shows in that, we already have the evidence based on this definition of the Patriot Act. Let's be real here. A person engages in domestic terrorism if they do an act dangerous to human life. That is a very broad definition, but based simply on that little portion of the redefinition of domestic terrorism, yes, the insurrection in the Capitol was an act of terrorism, domestic terrorism, because it was dangerous to human life. An act dangerous to human life that is a violation of criminal laws of a state or the United States. Yes, vandalism, assault, dangerous to human life, domestic terrorism. But there's more, right? If the act appears to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, that really didn't happen. They did not try to intimidate, coerce a civilian population. But they definitely did try to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. They definitely did that. Remember, this is an or scenario. To influence the policy of government. Yes, they tried to influence the Electoral College vote count. So based on this definition, people are right. That was an act of terrorism. Now, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination and kidnapping didn't happen. The guy with the zip ties could have been a kidnapping situation. Very serious charge, domestic terrorism. Mass destruction. How do we define mass destruction? You know, one can easily use this definition and apply it to the riots that occurred during the summer, which I disagree with. But they could do that. Mass destruction. Right? Intimidate and coercion to influence policy. See how loose this definition is according to the U.S. Patriot Act. So, when you call people domestic terrorists, I want to make sure that we know what domestic terrorism is being defined as. And that's what the Patriot Act defines it as. So when you say someone's a domestic terrorist, are you saying you want them to be charged in a similar fashion? To be charged as such? Now this is where the ACLU makes its case. Section 808 does not create a new crime of domestic terrorism. However, it does expand the type of conduct that the government can investigate when investigating terrorism. The U.S. Patriot Act expanded governmental powers to investigate terrorism, and some of these powers are applicable to domestic terrorism. So this is what the ACLU says. The definition of domestic terrorism is broad enough to encompass the activities of several prominent activist campaigns and organizations. Greenpeace, Operation Rescue, Vicky's Island, I'm saying that way wrong. Vicky's Island, this is in Puerto Rico, and the WTO protesters and the Environmental Liberation Front have all recently engaged in activities that could subject them to being investigated as engaging in domestic terrorism. Now, I know people on the left are not saying all these people need to be called domestic terrorists and need to be charged as such. No, I'm pretty sure a lot of leftists would defend some of these orgs and not consider their work domestic terrorism. But based on the Patriot Act, the ACLU is pointing at it. These are experts in the law saying this is the danger of it. Now, they use the Vicky's Island. I'm so bad at this. I should have learned how to pronounce. So the Vicky's Island protest, it was a concern throughout the 90s. And actually, it was for a long time. It was like for 60 years. Then the people of Puerto Rico, they were protesting the idea that the Navy came in and established a military base. And they would test their weaponry there, their bombs. These bombs would cause contamination into their environment, which impacts the health of the people, the inhabitants there. So, what happens? The Puerto Rican people protest. And what do? They enter the military base as a form of protest to prevent the military from running its tests on its new bombs. Remember what we said. This is a danger to human life. So the ACLU is saying, based on this scenario, the Puerto Rican protests in Vicky's Island, they could have been considered domestic terrorists because they were endangering human life. They were using this kind of tactic to influence government policy. Now, there was a victory because a security guard ended up dying. He was a resident of Puerto Rico, but he was a public employee within the base. He was killed by accident. So in 2003, the base got shut down. There was a victory for Puerto Ricans. Now this is clearly different, right? These people were fighting for their lives, for their health. I had a friend tell me, you invade the Capitol, that's a serious offense. Puerto Rican people invaded a federal property. That was a serious offense. And it was so quick to calling them domestic terrorists. I don't think they should be, right? But they were somewhere they shouldn't have been. And so the ACLU is pointing this out. But they were fighting for their lives. So once again, there's always a distinction. I know the nuance. But this is what the ACLU is using as their example. They feared that people like these protesters, they could have been held accountable under the Patriot Act. And so let's look at some of the things that would have happened if you consider people domestic terrorists. So, the seizure of assets. Section 806 of the Act could result in civil seizure of their assets without a prior hearing and without them ever being convicted of a crime. So I'm just going to stop there. this is the disturbing part about civil asset forfeitures are very, very important police power that needs to end. Okay? I get that there's criminal organizations, terrorist organizations, and you need to exhaust all resources to prevent harm created by these organizations. But this impacts Americans, regular Americans, hardworking Americans. If there's a preponderance of evidence to implicate any individual, so it doesn't even have to be the best, like the closest evidence someone can get. It can just be a preponderance of evidence, and their assets are seized, and they don't even have to be convicted of a crime. How is that a trial by jury? How is that our constitutional way? So that's what happens when you label domestic terrorists. And this goes on. It says people that are affiliated, just affiliated with those movements. So possible supporters of the protesters could include student organizations and sponsored the participation in the demonstration, Rainbow Push Coalition, the Reverend Sharpton's National Action Network, the religious or community organizations that provided housing or food to the protesters. The language is broad enough to authorize the government to seize any assets of any individuals involved in the Vekis Island protest or any of the organizations supporting the protest of which a person is a member or from the individuals supporting the protest. See, so you could just be an organization while you don't participate in the civil disobedience, but because they were part of it and you helped them in some way, boom. ACLU is saying this is how dangerous the language goes. You know, it goes on. They end up having a right to pull up your educational records, your tax information from the IRS, things that are supposed to be private, not public stuff, private information. The government gains full access if you're implicated in having involvement with someone that's being charged with domestic terrorism. We have a video, look at it. It's with Daniel Epstein. He ran for the Illinois Supreme Court. We talk about civil asset forfeiture. I think it's a conversation that needs to be talked about more and more. The police are corrupt and they seize people's property without a court, without being charged with anything. And it's the civilians, it's their obligation, not their obligation, it's their problem. If you want your stuff, you have to prove that it wasn't involved in a crime. That's backwards. Police are supposed to prove a crime took place. But that's not what this says. So there is so much in this. So here's another one. Single jurisdiction search warrants. This section of the U.S. Patriot Act amends the rule of Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure to authorize the government to go before a single federal magistrate judge in any judicial district in which activities relating to terrorism may have occurred to obtain a warrant to search property or a person within or outside the district. This means the government could go to a single judge to get a warrant to search the property or person of the Vekis activists in New York, Chicago, California, or wherever else the protesters were from. If the government chooses to go before a magistrate in New York or a person in California who wishes to seek and have a warrant squashed, he or she is believed it was invalid, would have to find a way to... So, okay, just so you understand. Let's put it in clear context of what happened. Parler might reveal some information that might hurt the right-wing protesters, rioters. And so if you find out that a nearby church helped feed some of the Trump supporters that are called domestic terrorists, and for whatever weird reason, the United States government wants to press charges, but they want to do it in Chicago, not in DC, for whatever dumb reason. That church, the person in that church, they have to travel to Chicago if they want to challenge the warrant. They want to challenge anything. See, this is the broad power of the Patriot Act. and calling people domestic terrorists and treating them as such. People's rights get violated easily without any real conviction of a crime, and it could spread for days. So, yes, if that entire group is domestic terrorists, they're going to be treated as such, even if they're not all domestic terrorists. You know, this is where it comes down to, and I'll wrap this up. The ACLU has a conclusion to all of this. The ACLU does not oppose criminal prosecution of people who violate the law. Neither do I, even if they are doing so for political purposes. However, we do oppose the broad definition of terrorism and the ensuing authority that flows from that definition. One way to ensure that the conduct that falls within the definition of domestic terrorism is in fact terrorism is to limit the scope of the conduct that triggers the definition. Thus, domestic terrorism could include acts which cause serious physical injury or death, rather than all acts that are dangerous to human life. This narrow definition will exclude the conduct of organizations and individuals that engage in minor acts of property damage or violence. So that's the key right there. Acts which cause serious physical injury or death. Serious physical injury or death rather than all acts are dangerous to human life. The more narrow definition will exclude individuals that engage in minor acts of violence or property damage. See, that's where I'm at. There was cause of serious physical injury. The police officer died. So it's very serious. But all of them, some of them destroyed property. Minor acts of property damage. Busting windows. Clashing with police. Like just clashing, not striking people in the head that can lead to death. But this is the definition of the ACLU, and this is my problem again. I run back to the meaning of words and why it's important. Definitions under the law matter. So if you call someone a murderer, the implication is you want them to be tried as a murderer. You try someone as a rapist if you call them a rapist. You call people domestic terrorists, you want to try them as domestic terrorists. And the Patriot Act suddenly becomes a good thing. Well, we know the problems with the Patriot Act, and we know the security concerns that are very serious. So I've been going on for already over an hour. And the threat of white supremacy is real. I'm not ignoring it. There were acts of terror committed. They were committed last week at the Capitol. But once again, painting a broad stroke over everyone, defining them as domestic terrorists, it makes my heart cry. And I only ask for people, try to lead with compassion, humility, love and forgiveness. It's easier said than done. And these mobs of Trump supporters and white supremacists, they threaten people's livelihood. Their very existence is threatened. So we need to create a better world. It starts with us trying to be that example. Accountability is a must. Acts of terror were committed. But what's next for America? Do we continue to become even more bipolar? And the responsibility isn't fully on the left-wing organizations and the leftists like myself. But bridges need to be created. Conversations need to be had. And if we are to embrace a spirit of progress for the betterment of all humanity, we must consider how far are we willing to go. Definitions aside, What kind of system do we want to leave for our children or our children's children? Is this punitive system of policing effective? Is a rising police state going to be the answer? Will the government respond by allocating more and more power to an already corrupted system of policing? Or will we reform and love our brethren and hopefully create a better future? It's tough, and I know people are going to disagree with me. People are going to call me an idiot and a moron, tone deaf. But my heart bleeds for people. And the left-wing movement, the movements need to rise, and they need to make sure we push our leaders in the right direction, hold the leaders accountable. There needs to be massive police accountability, especially in DC, at the Capitol. If people are domestic terrorists, then the police were complicit in their acts. And how far does the label domestic terrorists go when those stood by and tried to reason with the Trump supporters, rioters, protesters? What message does that send? It sends a very clear one to leftists, people of color that live in fear day by day. They get away with it because they're white. They get away with it because they follow a neo-fascist movement. They get away with it because they're not trying to change the system of policing. They're not trying to challenge police power. They're trying to undermine the democracy of the people. They're trying to establish an absolute power of dominance with their cult leader, Donald Trump. Well, enough is enough, and there needs to be a precedent. I think this is where I fail the most. If this isn't a severe situation, next time is, what consequences come with that? What message do we send to the world? If you step foot on our Capitol and wreak havoc and instill fear, what are we saying if we give a slap on the wrist? It's very hard. It's very hard to have this discussion and try to think of it in a nuanced way. Okay, you fools on the left, this is watching trains go by. You fools on the left set this in motion by terrorizing America. Thank you for watching the Existentialists, watching trains go by. I appreciate your viewership. I disagree with you fully. Right-wingers corrupt on their moral compasses all the time. I'm not saying leftists don't. But when right-wingers do it, so ironic. You believe in law and order. So practice it. Live a law-abiding life and an orderly life, and don't cause chaos. And don't say hang pence loudly. Don't walk into a Capitol building with zip ties and just say you're just because the leftists did it. If it's wrong for one, is wrong for all. If one group is terrorist, it's easy to say the other are. This is the dangerous part of language. But ladies and gentlemen, I have to go. I kept on for so long, already an hour 15 minutes. Apologies for the delays before, but I'm Tony B. Please make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter at capital D Existentialist, and like us on Facebook, comment, share. It's important to engage in dialogue so we move the country forward. Yeah, this is the Existentialist.
Wake up, wake up, wake up. Welcome to Shy Society. I wake up in the morning and the first thing that I see is a bunch of cranky people on a full bus with no seats, repeatedly undermining what's in common misery. Strangers remain blinded to existence and their history. What's the recipe? Well, taxes and a slave wage, harassment from the debt they face. Family happenings may take place, wait, negate the hate. The fan you'll never ever hurt, brothers and sisters.